When I'm up through the night, I can't turn down the noise, tear all the words out of my mind about who I'm supposed to be. I start to believe I can't get it right. Remember the days I let slip away, they were simpler times. Mama told me before you leave, if there's only one thing you remember from me, child, when you're out on your own, a million miles from home, feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. Child, don't forget who you are, don't lose your head or your heart. I'll bet my life on your stars, you'll be dancing, dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life you'll be dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life you'll be dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life you'll be dancing on the moon. Dancing on the moon. Dancing on the moon. Maybe my compass was wrong, and I'm still on my way closer each day to where I belong. I'm still rolling the dice, praying sometimes it don't last that long. I'm losing my faith, I'm walking away from what you knew all along. Mama told me before you leave, if there's only one thing you remember from me, child, when you're out on your own, a million miles from home, feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. Child, don't forget who you are, don't lose your head or your heart. I'll bet my life on your stars, you'll be dancing, dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life you'll be dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life you'll be dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life you'll be dancing on the moon. Dancing on the moon. Child, when you're out on your own, a million miles from home, feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. Child, don't forget who you are, don't lose your head or your heart. I'll bet my life on your stars, you'll be dancing, dancing on the moon.
Quiet's driving me insane. Silence rattles in my brain. Yeah, I gotta get away. Always waiting for the phone, so I built my towers tall, wandering through these empty halls. Break the cycle now, walls are coming down. I gotta make it out. Yeah, 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 yeah. Ooh. to save me from myself. This emptiness, it hurts like hell. My good intentions let me down.
I walk to you so I can be close to you. It's really simple if you look at it that way. Time that we get by with money we don't know. Pockets empty but hearts are full anyway. Hey. Playing like children and love like orange. You were too good for me, but I wanted you anyway. I always loved you over my head, even when you lived alone to make your parents mad. Say goodbye to your old life, turn the page, follow my bed. I don't care if loving you over my head. You talk to me like breeze, running free, beautiful images everywhere. Yeah. You take a picture of us kissing in cars, it makes my day 10 times better. Yeah. Playing like children and love like orange. You were too good for me, but I wanted you anyway. I always loved you over my head, even when you lived alone to make your parents mad. Say goodbye to your old life, turn the page, follow my bed. I don't care if loving you over my head.
I wanna heal your sorrow. Just talk to me. We'll make a new tomorrow. Just talk to me. We'll make this happen. Showing off, don't wanna have to wait tonight. Better off, I'm gonna find my way tonight. Won't you talk to me? I wanna heal your sorrow. Won't you talk to me? We'll make a new tomorrow. Won't you talk to me? We'll make this happen.
When I'm up through the night, I can't turn down the noise. Tear all the worries out of my mind about who I'm supposed to be. I start to believe I can't get it right. Remember the days I let slip away. They were simpler times. Mama told me before you leave, if there's only one thing you remember from me, child, when you're out on your own, a million miles from home, feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. Child, don't forget who you are. Don't lose your head or your heart. I'll bet my life on your stars. You'll be dancing, dancing on the moon. I'll bet my life you'll be
there, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Pac-U Collegiate Invitational for League of Legends. Tonight's scheduled games include matches between University of Oregon versus Washington State University. Then after, we'll see University of Arizona face off against University of Southern California. The Pac-U is a group of schools working together to connect directly and plan events and matches that are, from a schedule standpoint, modeled after how analog sports are showcased. Right now, through esports, we are able to communicate with one another and form a community digitally that many of us in this past year have not been able to do. We'll be streaming on the Pac-U Gaming channel on Twitch plus respective universities' pages. Now, to introduce ourselves, I'm Dylan Palacios from the University of Southern California, and I'll be serving as one of your casters tonight.
My name is Aaron Fawn, and I'm from University of Washington. I'll be providing some play-by-play casting for you tonight.
All right, let's get started. And actually, a bit of a mistake on my part. We're actually going to see University of Arizona face off against USC first. And to address the elephant in the room, we're going to be playing on the brand new Season 11 patch for League of Legends. So if you've been following with us through the past 4 weeks, you're going to be seeing a completely different game because Riot Games decided that it would be really fun to redesign and completely overhaul the entire item system. So we're going to see brand new items. Every item has been adjusted in some way, shape, or form with different stats, something. So we're going to be seeing a completely different game.
Absolutely. What we're looking at here is nothing less than League of Legends 2, in my opinion. And when it comes to this new item system, which is absolutely the crux of this Season 11 preseason, one of the things that's worth pointing out is the introduction of a new concept called Mythic Items. And for those of you in the audience who haven't been following up with the patch notes recently, Mythic Items are they're like the legendary items that you might be used to, but they offer special abilities and stats that allow you to tailor your playstyle to the game, and also provide stats to the rest of the items available to you. And Dylan, what do you have to say about some of the changes that have been made this preseason?
I think they're extremely exciting. We're seeing a completely different game, and especially the mythic items, they're super overpowered, but you can only buy one of them. And now we're heading into the bans.
Yeah, we're gonna have to save that item talk for the rest of the game, but right now in the ban phase, Washington State University versus Oregon, we might look to see some of those traditional OP bans going out. It's going to be the Fiora going out for Oregon. That's going to be taken away from Washington State University. And it's going to be answered by the Set. I know the University of Oregon top laner is an avid Set player, and those two top lane bans make a lot of sense in a meta where solo lanes often dictate the face of the game.
Yeah, exactly. The set ban is definitely interesting, but like you mentioned, the University of Oregon top laner really likes to play him, but he hasn't been showing the data that other OP picks have been.
Yep, and speaking of OP picks, it's going to be the Lucian taken away by Washington State University. Throughout the World Championships, we've seen how that pick has been able to dominate the mid lane, and with the addition of some new items with the preseason, I'm thinking especially about the Navori Quick Blades. Lucian able to cast those abilities just as often as those auto attacks, and makes him a very terrifying force once he gets off the ground. And the third ban for Washington State University is going to be the Kha'Zix. Kha'Zix, with the new lethality items available to him in the preseason, is a devastating force. I'm thinking, of course, about the Eclipse item, which is going to give you some extra % health damage, as well as a shield once you get 2 separate attacks off on your opponent. And there are many different Kha'Zix builds popping up right now. We've seen the full lethality, we've seen the Bruiser, and we're going to see the Samira locked in immediately for Oregon. Samira, devastating pick from the moment she's been released, and absolutely a very high priority pick for Oregon. And I think if there's any certain counter to the Samira, it might not be in lane, but it is going to come down to the team composition. And one way to do it is going to be to lock her down. And that's why we might be seeing the Alistar come out for Washington State University. He's got that lockdown, and he doesn't have any projectiles that Samira is able to block. So if they want to keep her from getting those stacks and getting that ultimate with the lifesteal, Alistar is the pick to do it. We're going to see in a second what they're going to decide to pair with the Alistar here. Might it be the AD carry to match the Samira, or another high priority pick? It is going to be the Jhin. Jhin, another very high priority AD carry on this patch. He was very popular throughout the World Championships, but he's only gotten stronger with the addition of the preseason items. Another very good user of the Eclipse item. Many of the new mythic items for AD carries tailored around attack speed, but of course Jhin, not one of the best users of that stat, but what he is a good user of is lethality and making the most out of his auto attacks, and that Eclipse item is going to do just that for him. And in response to that bot lane locked in for Wazoo, it's going to be Morgana picked up for Oregon. Morgana is going to be a great response to the Alistar. We're going to try to negate a lot of the CC layering that is available on this Wazoo bot lane, and now the Shen going to be picked up. An interesting pick here. It's very self-sufficient in the top lane, but of course the main crux of this pick is the ability to open up opportunities for your team to make very bold plays, and of course try to keep that Samira alive in the bot lane so that she can get those stacks up and get that ultimate. And if she gets low, she has the shield to get all the way back up to full health if she can get that ultimate going. Now it's going to be the Poppy instead. Yep, and Shen going to be answered with the Poppy now. Poppy, I think, is a very strong pick in the top lane that doesn't get as much love as it should, and if it's ever going to get any love, it's going to be against this Shen pick, where Shen, of course, his strongest basic ability is going to be that taunt dash, and going to be stopped by Poppy with that W of hers. And I think it's a great niche pick that Wazoo have got for themselves, and they're both teams answering their drafts well in turn, and now the bans going to be Zoe and Orianna for Wazoo. Meanwhile, the Zillion going out in Oregon. We're seeing a lot of mid lane focus in these bans so far. Another mid lane ban going the way of Oregon. And now what's interesting to me is that we've got only 2 jungle bans so far on each side. We've got Kha'Zix and the Elise for Wazoo and Oregon. And I think, of course, jungle, a very prominent role in the current metagame, able to dictate the course of the game, especially in the early game. And that's a Mumu being locked in for Washington State University. You might not be used to seeing this pick in the past several seasons, but with the addition of the Season 11 preseason items, Amumu has become an absolute terror in the jungle. He's got so much tankiness and he's got so much sustained damage between the new Sunfire Cape and some of the new AP options available to him. I'm thinking, of course, about the Demonic Embrace, which is going to provide him with some damage over time, as well as some tankiness. And now, speaking of jungle picks, Amumu is going to be answered by Kayn, a bit more of an early game pick, and it's got a lot of farming potential, and another great user of some of the new items that we've seen. Very diverse builds available to Kayn between the new fighter mythics as well as the assassin items. He's got that Eclipse, but he's also got the Gore Drinker to keep himself healthy if he chooses to go red Kayn, and now Cassiopeia going to round out the Oregon draft. Cassiopeia, a great user of some of the sustained damage magic items available to us in the preseason. Leandri's Torment, Demonic Embrace, things of that nature are going to mean that Cassiopeia is going to make each of her abilities so much stronger and is going to be able to shred through the tanky members of the Washington State University draft. And now Syndra is going to be the answer for Washington State University, a traditionally lane-dominant pick, and is going to try to wrestle away control from this Cassiopeia before she turns into that late-game monster who's going to tear apart the Alistar, the Amumu, and the Poppy. And now with all the picks locked in for Wazoo and for Oregon, I think we've got a lot of team fighting going on the side of Washington State University. Amumu going to be a big factor in that, but of course, we have some pick available as well. I'll start with the Headbutt Pulverize in conjunction with the Deadly Flourish from Jhin, able to catch people out from long range and have that Curtain Call to follow up. But if those catch outs do happen, Oregon is going to be there to answer with the Shen ultimate. Stand United going to make sure that none of their teammates get caught out too out of position. And of course, there is the Morgana with the Black Shield to try to mitigate a lot of the crowd control that is on this Washington State University draft. And I think what is going to be the focal point of this matchup is going to be which of these junglers is able to get off the ground earliest. Amumu, we traditionally think of as a scaling jungler, and we're going to have to see if the jungler of Oregon is able to abuse that early game to try to outfarm the Amumu and outpace him and try to create more space before Amumu can carve himself out some of those items that he needs to turn into that unkillable threat of tankiness for Washington State University. But of course, one thing you've got to keep in mind is the Samira pick on the side of Oregon. It's always been going out of control whenever we've seen it here at the Pac-U, and once it gets a couple kills going off the ground, it is an absolute terror. Samira, I've yet to see which of the mythic items she's going to opt for in the preseason, but I do know that there are plenty of new Grievous Wounds options available, no matter what your role is. We have them available to the supports, we have them available to AP carries at just 800 gold, and of course, we have the Bramble Vest and the Executioner's Calling, and that's going to be a big factor in keeping the Samira in check, is trying to prevent her from using that Conqueror in conjunction with the healing from her ultimate to try to take the team fights all by herself. But she's not going to be alone in that endeavor. Of course, there is that Cassiopeia. Not as much of an AoE threat, but very high sustained damage. And it's going to be a very hard team to itemize against between these two hyper carry threats on the side of Oregon. But if there's any defensive itemization that was going to be happening, it is going to be from this Washington State University composition. Amumu and Poppy, and of course Alistar with his damage reduction. Once these picks start to get a few items, there are so many new defensive options available to tanks in the preseason. If you thought tanks weren't viable before now, you might want to start logging in, because they are absolutely back and in a big way, not just with tankiness, but with a lot of damage. All 3 of the tank-oriented mythic items in the preseason, of course, providing the former Sunfire Immolate passive, but in a lot of different ways. We've got the traditional Sunfire Cape now providing auto attacks with the burn once you get the passive fully stacked up. But of course, there is also the new AP option to replace the Righteous Glory. now also providing the same passive. And of course, the new Frostfire Gauntlet, formerly known as the Iceborne Gauntlet, providing the same option, but with a slow field as well. And I'm always interested to see how these teams are going to itemize their champions, especially with this whirlwind of changes that we've got going on in the preseason. Nothing is set in stone and nothing is solved. And what I am so excited for today is to see how these teams are able to adapt to this new patch, which has only been out for a few days, and what kind of spicy new stuff they're going to have to show us here in this show match, which is going to be getting started in a second. Right. Right, my co-caster appears to be muted, and I am going to have to take away the rest of this broadcast as we wait for that issue to get fixed. But in the meantime, my co-caster did mention while muted that Samira is a great user of the Immortal Shield Bow. That is the mythic item providing some lifesteal and a shield once you get very low on health for those AD carries, and that is absolutely going to synergize very well with Samira's kit. She's all about diving into the backline and getting those stacks going so that she can get that ultimate and make back all the health that she had lost. And of course, that shield bow going to give her the survivability that she needs. And hopefully my co-caster has arrived.
Yep, my mic is back.
Perfect.
So Mira, her ult is one of the best things about it is that she can lifesteal throughout the entire thing. And if she can get into the middle of a fight, she can just kind of take over everything, because there's just no possible way she can die unless she gets locked down. One of the best picks out of Washington State University was that Syndra, because like earlier on into the draft, we got the spell shield out from the Morgana. However, one of the best champions that can just pop it in an instant is the Syndra, because if she's able to throw down a dark sphere or unrelenting power onto the Samira, then she can get locked down by the Amumu, by the Poppy, by the Alistar, and there's just so much CC that just becomes unavoidable.
Absolutely. These team fights are all going to come down to whether that Samira is able to get locked down and whether they're able to stop her before she's able to get those stacks and get that ultimate going. And of course, plenty of tools on the side of Oregon to make sure that doesn't happen. It's a great back and forth draft, I think, and it's going to be very interesting to see how these team fight compositions are going to interact with each other, whether that Stand United and Black Shield are going to be enough to keep the Alistar and the Amumu and the Poppy all at bay. I think the Poppy, not only a great answer to the Shen, but also to the Samira, who of course is using that dash reset whenever she gets a takedown to weave in and out of these fights and try to find the opportunities that she needs to build up the stacks and find the right opportunity to go in. And that's all going to be mitigated by that ability of Poppy's to stop dashes and keep them locked down.
Yeah, my favorite part about that draft, like you mentioned, is how dynamic it was, how back and forth. Every new pick was an answer to one previous. And specifically, like you mentioned, that Poppy pick and the Amumu is actually really nice, because he's all about getting down and using his bandages to move onto a target. He's one of the tanks with actual like lockdown and long range mobility, and it's one of the few mobility options that will not be blocked by the Cassiopeia miasma. If you get hit with the bandages, nothing can save you. The Amumu is going to get on top of you, and he's going to ult you and stun you in place forever. The only way that they can avoid it is this Morgana spell shield, and the support for University of Oregon has a tall order in front of him, because he has to use his spell shields just at the right moment, because with so many forms of CC coming out left and right, and the Syndra being able to get rid of the spell shield in an instant, finding the key moment to put it down where it will give Samira the option to pop off is going to be so important, because you won't be able to spell shield every form of CC that's coming out. There's just too much.
Absolutely. I'm so excited for this Amumu pick. It's been a very, very, very long time since we've seen this pick in any competitive context, and it's what it shows is these teams doing their homework. They've done their research, and they know that tanks are back in a big way, and Amumu is one of the best users of these new tank items. And I can't wait to see how they decide to itemize, whether they're going for this full tank option, whether they're going to weave in a little bit of sustained damage with the new AP options that are available to them. And of course, a bit of a more unorthodox pick in the jungle of Oregon. We've got that Kane going on the other side. And of course, Kane, one of the original most versatile junglers in the game. He can either opt for that full assassin option or for that sustain in the form of the Rost. And that's going to be two entirely different itemization paths that are available to him, and very dependent on how the course of this game is going.
Yep, on both itemization paths, Kane has two really insanely strong mythic items on both end of the spectrum. If he wants to go Rost, and where he'll be a bruiser that life steals throughout any fight that gets thrown out from him, he'll want to opt for the Gore Drinker, which is a new item that has an active ability that's essentially what Tiamat used to be, except he presses the active, throws a giant cleave around himself, and he life steals for I believe it's 10% of his health.
12%.
12%. 12% of his missing health per enemy champion. So
right.
Let's say he gets into all 5 of the enemies. There's no cap on it like a Darius Q has. So he can heal up to 56% of his missing health, and that's going to be insane. But if he wants to opt for Shadow Assassin instead, then he'll have Eclipse, which is an all-around assassin item that has been tearing up the Rift.
Absolutely. Two great examples of how these new mythic items let you have agency in determining how you want to play out these games. So many new options to adjust to the course of each game, and how many different factors are available to keep in mind. And with that Conqueror, it looks like he might be opting for the Red Kane this game, that Rost option with plenty of lifesteal. We're going to see if he's going to keep that Gore Drinker like you mentioned, or if he's going to still opt for that lethality. And if you haven't been keeping up with the preseason, you might notice some strange starting items we've got here. There's, of course, Doran's Shield and Doran's Blade looking a little bit different, but keeping a lot of their same functionality. But the junglers here, they've got something a little bit different going on, and those knives that they're holding are going to provide them with these smites, the challenging smite and the chilling smite, once they have cast their smite on minions 5 times. And that item is going to be consumed eventually, and provide all the bonuses that it originally provided, and allow junglers to opt for these new mythic items instead of being locked into the traditional jungle items that we've been used to.
Yep, and it looks like we're stepping away from the games just for a moment, because as you saw when we brought the games up, we were missing some sound, so it looks like we're fixing some technical difficulties. But as Aaron was saying, there are these new jungle items that are essentially kind of similar to the support item changes that we saw last season,
right,
where now it's based on a smite quest. You use your smite 5 times, you keep your jungle item stats, and now it opens you up to having 6 items. So that's really nice, especially for scaling junglers. However, they lose the option for an incredibly gold efficient first item that we saw in the jungle items of Warrior, Runic Echoes, etc. So this will have maybe some effect on these early game junglers. However, they now have options to access these new incredibly powerful mythic items that are tearing up the Rift.
Yep, just another way that Riot is allowing junglers to buy into this new item system, and going to give them a lot of similar item spikes that we see to laners. Lost Chapter in place of the Runic Echoes, which came on a lot earlier than most people. Now we are back in the game with the sound available, and that sound is going to be a binding coming down onto Alistar, and followed up by the extended knockup from the Samira. So many ways to apply crowd control down in this bot lane on either side. Morgana binding into that Samira can spell certain death once they get enough items, but of course, plenty of CC layering on the side of Washington. Alistar and Jhin able to apply their roots and their knockups, and able to secure a kill down the line eventually if they can find it. And it looks like we're going to go to a black screen for now, as we're returning back into the game. And speaking of strange starting items, it's not just the junglers who got some new toys to play with, but also the mid laners. We can see HH Comet on the side of Oregon has something a bit strange looking. That blue item there is actually the Tear of the Goddess. Traditionally a 850 gold item in Season 10 is now a starting item available for 400 gold. It is not providing any combat stats at all. It is providing a bit of mana, but it is going to allow you to start charging that item a bit sooner than you normally would, and it's a bit of a greedy option for those who feel like they might have an easier time in the lane.
Yeah, exactly. This is going to be the option for Barlos Ladane, the Syndra for Washington State, to abuse this Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia has been traditionally weak in the laning phase, and she just got a whole lot weaker by opting to build into this Tear of the Goddess first. It will give her the option to maybe start Archangels if she doesn't decide to go for a mythic item for her first buy, because as strong as mythic items are, there's still build versatility. You don't necessarily have to go with a mythic item for your first item every single game. There's some options there, because if she doesn't want to opt into Archangels, she might go into the new Leandries that builds out of Lost Chapters. So it's a viable starting item for Cassiopeia, because it will still give her a band-aid to her severe mana issues.
Yep, and the reduced combat stats on that starting item are not going to stop her from constantly shoving in that lane. She, of course, has the backup from UL Proxy to make sure that she is comfortable to do that, and we can see how this jungle dynamic is starting to play out. Voperto on this Amumu just opting for the full clear, knowing that he can't contest the Kayn in the early game, at least not until he starts getting a bit items. And that's going to mean that Proxy is going to find himself 2 Scuttle Crabs and get himself a lot of value there, but Scuttle Crab has also been changed, not just the items getting changed here in this preseason. Scuttle Crab used to provide health and mana upon killing it, but now is just going to provide you with that big gold spike, and with that vision, that health and mana passive now being provided by the Gromp, and it's just going to alleviate some of the pressure of having to give up both of those Scuttle Crabs.
Yep, it looks like the bot lane for Washington State are getting to a bit of a CS advantage. A giant wave is crashing in to Oregon right now, where Samira can pick up some of that deficit, but even with that wave, she's still 10 CS down, which is okay for the Samir. Jhin has longer range, he can harass her in lane, but it looks like Cassiopeia is getting engaged on.
Yep, Comet might not be okay here, as he's trying to put down the Miasma to prevent the Amumu from getting onto him. He has Conquer fully stacked up, the Bandage Toss is going to go wide, and now Proxy is here for the backup. He has the Reaping Slash to force Voperto away, and keep his mid laner alive with both those summoners available.
Yep, Comet got away with the help of his Kayn there, and luckily will not be set too far behind in lane, because Syndra would have stacked a giant wave against the Cassiopeia and crashed the whole thing into losing a bunch of gold, but Cassiopeia is actually opting to teleport back into lane to put the pressure onto Syndra.
Yep, she's got double amplifying tone, which means she's opting for the Lost Chapter. Not going to be an Archangel staff first this game, and that Lost Chapter very well could be building into the Leandri's Torment, like you mentioned, but of course, AP Mages, plenty of new toys to play with in this preseason. There's the Leandri's Torment that we're used to, but there is, of course, a new item in the Rift Maker, not providing a lot of the mana that Cassiopeia might be used to, but it is providing a ramping true damage effect that is going to increase the damage she deals by 10%, and also the Omnivamp, which is going to synergize very well with the Conqueror, and how quickly this Cassiopeia pick is able to put out that damage and keep herself alive in these team fights.
Yeah, Omnivamp is a term that League of Legends players will have to get real familiar with this preseason, because one of the big changes to items is that there's just healing everywhere on items, where you've got either Omnivamp, where you heal from either your basic attacks or abilities. Maybe you've got good old Lifesteal, where you just heal on basic attacks, or you've got Physical Vamp, which is you heal on only physical damage abilities. And your basic attack. So there's a lot of healing options here, but in response, Riot also brought in a lot of Grievous Wounds options. So maybe we'll see specifically the side of Washington State pull out a lot of different Grievous Wounds options, with Kayn potentially going Rust, healing unbelievable amounts, Samira opting into Shield Bow, and Cassiopeia just healing an unbelievable amount with her innate abilities and Conquer.
Yeah, but those triple Conqueror picks on the side of Oregon, Washington State is going to get a lot of value out of those Grievous Wounds options if they so opt for them. But here's Proxy picking up a dragon with the help of his bot lane. He knows that the Amumu is not ready to fight him at this stage in the game, and he's going to try to exert as much early game pressure as possible. He knows that he wants to be fighting at this stage in the game, and if he can't force a fight, he can at least force a dragon. But preferably he would get a gank off and start to get those stacks going so that he can transform into either the Rost or the Shadow Cane later into this game. But fortunately, having lost the dragon and a few Scuttle Crabs, Voperto is keeping up fairly well in the CS department, has himself a bit of a gold lead there in the jungle. But things looking very even at this stage in the game, and now Voperto might be looking to opt for a blue buff steal. He knows the jungler of Oregon is there in the bot lane, and he's going to take the opportunity with a well-placed pink ward to pick himself up a counter-jungled blue buff.
Yep, this is a good play by Voperto, but one of the more concerning things about the game is that Samira has closed up the gold deficit that she saw herself in against Washington State. And
hold on a second. Voperto might have been off Chu. He's starting the Rift Herald here, but we could see both solo laners of Oregon starting to move towards him. It looks like they backed off, though. We saw the pinks coming down, but it looks like they're going to give up that Herald gracefully, as Proxy is going to back instead of moving towards it.
Yep, it looks like Washington State are going to get this advantage, which could turn into a lot of gold for one of his laners. However, Samira is now level 6 with her new Noon Quiver, so it gives her some attack damage and attack speed with some extra bonus damage on hit, all for the low cost of 1,300 gold. So basically, it's a new option outside of BF Sword for an early game power spike for an ADC. But now she has level 6, so this is where her critical ult is now an option for her to win an all-in. So this is where we can see some dynamic fighting from the Morgana with a nice spell shield protecting Samira from the Alistar CC, and then she can run over this Jhin. Because the Samira into Jhin matchup is extremely favorable for Samira because she can eat that 4th shot with her Wind Wall.
Yep, and Samira might be seeing some action here as the mid lane roam is going to come down. Common has the Shen ult coming down onto him. Stand United not going to find any value at all, actually, as Washington State a bit heads up on that player, able to walk that one out without even using a summoner spell and without losing anything on this map, as they're actually going to force a flash out of UO Proxy, who finds himself all by his lonesome in the top side, as 4 members have committed themselves to that bot lane play that did not yield any fruit.
Yeah, I mean, University of Oregon had the right idea there, because Washington State's bot lane, they were pretty far up. They were at tower harassing Samira, but they knew that they didn't have vision on Shen, they didn't have it on Kayn, they didn't have it on Cassio, and they knew that all of a sudden they could be ganked like University of Oregon was about to set up. So it was just good map awareness from the bot lane of Washington State.
Yep, it's that well-calculated macro and awareness that is going to spell out a fairly quiet early game so far, with just one play happening as of yet, but we might be seeing something happen once that dragon spawns down the line. But for now, it's going to be most of these lanes just farming it up. We've seen Cassiopeia in the mid lane pushing in her opponent, and now a bit of a push going on for Oregon, but it's going to be answered back by Final Hour and Boodles in the bot lane, and with the Rift Herald having been taken by Voperto, that's opening up another avenue for a fight. But why need that when there's going to be a root coming down onto PDX Triplet? Boodles is forced to flash away as there are 3 members of the blue team on him, and going to have to use that ultimate as well to keep himself alive with that damage reduction. But here's a poorly placed teleport coming down from Oregon, is going to mean he's going to get rooted up. The Black Shield going to be forced out, and Tygoon going to be knocked up for just a moment, but no kills happening as of yet in a 4v4 bot lane play.
Yep, it looks like a Toru Shen is really trying to force some opportunities to help his bot lane, but first the Stand United didn't come up, and now his teleport seems to have been wasted. Luckily, the Poppy did teleport first, and so he's not at a teleport disadvantage, but you hate to see it.
Yeah, and we talked about that top lane dynamic. Poppy, the ability to stop dashes mean that it's very hard for the Shen to find trades on her in lane, and it is spelling disaster so far, as he's 20 CS down in this top lane matchup. Neither top laner with a teleport advantage, but maybe here's a play again as Boodles, he's got the Hex Flash, and he has the double knockup with the headbutt pulverize, but a well-placed Petrifying Gaze is going to mean that Barlos Lodane and Tygoon are not able to follow up on that play, and once again, an opportunity without any kills, but it is going to spell a dragon for Washington State as they are going to use the priority found in the mid lane to pick themselves up a Cloud Dragon.
Yeah, it looks like University of Oregon are really feeling the pressure to make something happen because they're staring down two huge tanks that are going to scale up into unkillable monsters, Poppy and Amumu. And then, you know, Alistar is going to pick up some tank stats, but he's going to be nowhere near as huge as his other two counterparts. And University of Oregon maybe feels like they won't be able to handle it, so they're trying to force...
Yeah, but can Blinkwin handle this Amumu? He's going to get knocked back by Boodles, who found himself a flank with that headbutt. The curtain call going to get a bit wide. The shot's not connecting and buying enough time for the first blood to be picked up by the Samira. And now the fight is going to go the way of Washington State as they're finally able to answer back those two kills. The roam from Barlos Lodane making it happen, but giving up a first blood that they probably didn't intend on.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the power of Samira damage. She was able to output that much damage before her ult had even come out, just because that's just how Samira rolls. But now it looks like Kane's trying to force something up top.
Yeah, Proxy, he misses or he doesn't miss. The is going to be flashed away by Tygoon. Almost lands the slow onto him, but no dice there. It's just going to be a flash going out from the top laner, but instead it's going to be the first turret and all 5 platings going the way of Final Hour in Washington State's bot lane.
Yep, it looks like despite the first blood going to the Samira, Jin has to be at a gold advantage over his lane counterpart. And she wasn't able to get into her mythic item, even though she picked up the first blood, because she opted into finishing her Berserker Greed first, probably feeling like the movement speed is an extremely important stat, but it looks like Kane's trying to find an opportunity.
Proxy knows there's no flash in the top lane. The knockout is going to come down from Tygoon, but it looks like it is not going to be enough as Proxy picks up a clean kill for himself. Vaperto, a bit late to the party, is going to have to waddle away from this one in tears, as Oregon is going to answer back with a kill of their own. Well timed from Oregon with that gank to abuse the flash that they earlier forced out. And like you said, mythic items starting to come out, and we've got a few on the screen already, especially on the side of Washington State. We see that Sunfire Aegis picked up by the top laner, as well as Vaperto on the Amumu. No surprise there. It is providing a lot of damage and a lot of tankiness in both resistances, but the Pulverize going to be missed by Boodles. A bit of a mechanical misplay here, but it's not going to stop Final Hour from diving in with that Gale Force. Now the Stand United is going to come out to try to keep Blanchquin alive. The Todd is going to connect onto just Vaperto, but he is very tanky and very alive. But here's full stacks on PDX Triplet. He's not going to get a lot of value, though, as he's going to go down as well. That's 3 kills picked up on the side of Washington State, and not so much as a health bar going down. Oregon.
Yeah, not only did Washington State have the numbers advantage, but they had the item advantage. There was no way that University of Oregon could even pick up a kill in that exchange there. And as you might have seen during that fight, Jin all of a sudden dashed forward to reposition his W, because that's what ADCs can do now. There's a new mythic item called Gale Force that gives you a dash like you've got an AD Proto Belt. And it's great for repositioning, running away from assassins, and it looks like we were wrong to predict that Final Hour was going to opt for Eclipse before the game had started, because he's looking to try and get this safety in mobility to get away from things like the Samira or the Shen taunt or the Kane trying to engage on a flank.
Yep, it's a great tech and providing him a lot of versatility in his playstyle. Like you said, it can be used defensively or offensively there, as he used it to try to execute Blanchquin there, and going to be used to great effect. And that's what I love to see in these show match games on this new patch, how players are deciding to work with these new items. There's no longer a prescribed meta to work with. Nothing is for certain, nothing set in stone, and I love to see these high-level players working with what they've got and feeling things out. And now feeling out this Rift Herald, the second one going to go the way of Washington State uncontested, looks like. They've got the pink wards to keep the rest of the team at bay, and Proxy not quite there in time to get that one. This Herald not going to find any platings, but it is going to find some chip damage onto a turret if they so please, and going to continue to build up an advantage that Washington State has already accrued.
Yep, all eyes are on the Jin and the Syndra for the side of Washington State, where they've both found themselves at a 1,000 gold advantage over their lane counterparts. They're really strong at this point and have to look to, or they don't even have to look to press their advantage, because they're going to have a massive front line going into the rest of the stages of the game to protect them at all points. I don't know how this Samira's gonna chew through them, even if she has, even with the insane damage that she can output.
Yep, and like you said, there's going to be a big front line in these team fights, but it's going to come down to whether Washington State has the damage from these mythic items to close these fights out. Of course, Jin and Syndra looking very huge at this stage in the game, and huge enough that Boodles is going to look for the headbutt pulverize onto Proxy, but not going to follow up with the rest of his team. They had 4 members there, but they weren't too ready to commit as they did not know where the rest of the team was, and they're going to force the Kane to have to retreat and now going to start up the Mountain Dragon for themselves. Oregon skirting around in their own jungle, going to decide whether or not they want to contest this one, and it looks like the answer is going to be no, as that is a Mountain Dragon going the way of Washington State, and that might spell disaster if a few more go their way, looking at the tank stats on their team composition.
Yep, and it looks like pointing out another itemization that came out on the side of University of Oregon is it looks like the Morgana is going for a more aggressive option for her mythic item. Instead of going for maybe a more supportive pick, she's instead building towards a Lianges where she can build up some burn damage onto these carries, and it will help to shred through this giant front line that we've been talking about. Same thing with the Cassiopeia. This is an anti-tank mythic item that's just going to start doing increasing damage as fights go on, and this is going to be their only shot to chew through this line.
Yeah, one of the main narratives that gets thrown around when new items come out is that there is too much damage in the game, and this game and that one might reign true, as, like you said, Blanche Quinn opting for the Leandre's Torment, going to make this adjustment for a Mountain Dragon buffed, very tanky frontline on the side of Washington State, and we'll see how intelligent that turns out. There are plenty of options for AP supports. I'm thinking, of course, about the Imperial Mandate, which is going to provide extra damage for her teammates if she can apply some crowd control to them. And speaking of mythic items, there's that shield bow that we mentioned for Samira, synergizing so well with her playstyle and with the lifesteal in her ultimate. And then as well, there is the Gore Drinker coming out for Kane. Like we said, it's going to provide him a huge burst of missing health restored for him, as if he can hit a lot of members of the enemy team with it. And that is going to be a great tie-in to the theme of Red Kane, of getting into the backline and healing up so much while being a major threat with those knockups.
Exactly. For anyone who's ever played any amount of League of Legends, you've had to experience a Rost come in, he throws his Q at you where he just dashes forward into a spin attack and heals most of his health. And now when he does that, he can just press his active ability to just gain even more health. It's just synergizing with exactly what he wants to do already, except he's just going to do it better now. It's going to be so hard for Washington State's damage to actually chew through that much lifesteal. However, if Rost isn't going to be able to stay in there that long with the amount of CC coming out for Washington State, maybe it'll be all for naught as soon as we start seeing Grievous Wounds coming out, like we see on the Syndra right now, where Syndra opted to buy an Oblivion Orb, which now provides 40% Grievous Wounds on this new smaller item. So now AP Burst Mages don't have to build all the way into a Morellonomicon to start getting Grievous Wounds into their kit.
Yeah, plenty of diversity to allow team compositions to adjust for very heavy team comps like we see from Oregon. And we're thinking about the damage that is available on these team compositions, but you can't discount the tanks in the top side of Washington State. That Sunfire Aegis with the fully stacked passive, once that burn starts being applied on those auto attacks, Poppy and Amumu are not going to be no small threat, and Ladane maybe finding a bit of damage onto Proxy, but Red Kane a bit too slippery to deal with, and he's just going to get bit poked there. And speaking of Barlos, on this Syndra, he's opted for the Luden's Echo to synergize with that Phase Rush. Once he lands a few spells onto an opponent, he's going to get a massive burst of movement speed between the Phase Rush, as well as the 30% movement speed bonus on a 10-second cooldown from the new Luden's Tempest. And that is going to make him very slippery and going to give him a lot of room to deal with things like the Shen Taunt, like the Miasma, and like the Dark Binding from the Morgana.
Exactly. All that movement speed and the dash from Jin is going to make it really hard for specifically the Cassiopeia to start outputting lots of damage onto these carries, because for Cassiopeia, she has to land her Circle Poison ability, her Q, to apply poison because that's what you need for her Twin Fangs to start doing damage. When you start throwing Twin Fangs at an opponent who you haven't poisoned, it starts doing nothing. It tickles. And you have to hit this very precise skill shot constantly in fights to actually output any damage. And with all this mobility, all this movement speed, the job of HH Comet is going to be very difficult.
Yep, and we can see how much the healing is being respected on the side of Washington State, as even with new magic penetration options available, Barlos Ladane is going to opt for the Morellonomicon fully completed. And with the Oblivion Orb providing 40% grievous wounds, that Morellonomicon is going to be applying 60% if he's dealing magic damage to opponents below half health. And as this dragon is starting to come up, let's take a survey of the items so far. Kane still working on his second, but Amumu is looking very large with the Sunfire Aegis and the Abyssal Mask completed already. That is going to be a terrifying teamfight threat, even as just a mere tank, but the Bandage Toss is going to go a bit wide as well as the Root. Proxy getting into the thick of it as he's finding 4 members of the enemy team all by himself, going to get taunted up, and now the stun is going to come down onto Blanchquin as well as the rest of the bot lane, but Yoa Proxy going to answer back with the kill onto Final Hour. Tycoon is going in, and now Proxy is having a hard time dealing the damage, but he's having an easy time staying alive with the heals. He almost finds the kill onto Boodles, but now Amumu is diving right back in. Volperto not even below half yet. He's going to get taunted up. He has the percent health damage to try to deal with HH Comet, and he's going to be taken down before we can find the kill onto the Cassiopeia, and now Barlos Ladane is all by himself in a 1v3 situation. He doesn't want to give this Mountain Dragon up, and the health bars are looking very low on the side of Oregon, but there's plenty of healing still on the side of Proxy and on Comet, who are going to be zoning away the Syndra from this fight with that Miasma and going to be picking up this dragon for themselves. Barlos trying to find his way into the pit. He's going to get taunted up for his troubles, and now Comet trying to get in there as well, but movement speed is not going to connect, and that's going to be 4 kills going the way of Oregon State, or of University of Oregon, excuse me, as well as the Mountain Dragon.
Proxy found such an amazing flank in that fight. He used his E to walk through the wall between the mid lane and the blue buff, and he found Jhin alone. He started dueling with Jhin, found himself low, but used his restraint to not use Gore Drinker too early. He went in on the Jhin, picked them off, and then it was 4 enemies left. Then he just entered the fight with his Q. Gore Drinker 3 healed from maybe 33% health to basically full because he heals just too much. And then he was just able to run over the rest of the fight. He just played that so immaculate.
If it's really a testament to how well this player knows the limits of his champion. We saw how he started that fight diving into 4 members of the enemy team without any fear, and he was absolutely rewarded for that bravery. He's going to get the Mountain Dragon for his teammates and going to start to even out this gold lead. He still finds himself with his team 2,000 gold down on their opponents, but now the lead is looking a bit more even. You can still see Final Hour on this Jhin getting a big gold advantage, starting to look towards 2,000. Getting himself ahead of this Samira, but if this Kayn continues to snowball, it's going to be very hard for the immobile AD carry like the Jhin to try to play the game.
Yep. Well, apparently he's a little bit mobile now because now he has the Gale Force, but it still wasn't enough to get away from the Kayn in that last fight, and Washington State are going to have to readdress how they play the rest of these fights in the game because they went all in. They went forward. All of their tanks were trying to lock down the Samir and the Cassio, and they just left the Jhin alone. Their Kayn can just flank from any possible angle, and the Shen can just use his Stand United to get right on top of him. And then all of a sudden, the Oregon front line is in your back line. So we've got to see the Poppy or the Alistar or somebody in the back trying to protect the Jhin.
Yep, we've talked about the role of the Poppy in this composition. It's getting value against Samira, it's getting value against Shen, and it's getting a value against the Kayn as well. Boodle's forced to use that ultimate to try to get away from said Kayn, but now Volperto going to pick up a Scuttle Crab instead. And like I was saying, that Reaping Slash is of course a dash, and Tygoon, if he can find himself between Final Hour and Proxy, he can prevent the Kayn from getting onto his Jhin and getting that annoying crowd control onto him that he needs to deal that damage. And speaking of the Jhin, after that Gale Force, he's going to be completing the Collector. This is a brand new legendary item for the lethality side of things that is going to provide you with attack damage with lethality and provide you with a unique passive that is going to execute opponents below 5% maximum health and provide you with 25 extra gold on takedowns. And With that, final hour might be looking to snowball the lead that he accrued in lane, but we'll see if he might need more defensive options, as that fight looked very hard for him to get that damage out that he needed in the midst of the Samira and the King.
Yeah, I mean, Jin's job here is really, really difficult, and it looks like his next item that he's built is the Executioner's Calling, so he's opting in with the rest of his team to start getting out some grievous wounds, because Kane just healed too much there. And luckily for Washington State, Samira has found herself kind of behind. She finally just ticked onto her second item when Jin just turned his Executioner's Calling into a full-on Mortal Reminder. Now, Mortal Reminder is a stronger version of its former self in the Grievous Wounds department, because now it doesn't just give 40% Grievous Wounds. Once you've auto-attacked a single enemy 3 times, you see that bonus increase to 60% Grievous Wounds. However, when you're building it on someone like Jin, this job is really difficult, and it looks like Samir is getting picked in the mid lane.
Yep, the Stand United is going to come down, but it's going to come down a bit too late, as Samira is going to get blown up immediately. That was that CC layering we were talking about, as Boodles in final hour making it happen, and the Black Shield going to be perfectly timed to try to prevent the Force of Will from knocking them up. And speaking of knockups, there's Proxy keeping the rest of the team at bay, but Blanchman is forced to flash away from this one, and now Shen, finding himself in the thick of things, is going to have to dash away from that one. And there's 5 members of Washington State pouring down into the bot lane and going to get the health bars pretty low, but not enough to find themselves a kill, and they're going to have to be happy with the kill onto the Samira, that major AD threat that we were talking about.
Luckily for University of Oregon, they were able to cut their losses. They had the spell shield to make sure not to get locked down, and mobility from Shen and Kane to just walk away. And now we see the Casio just farming in the top lane, just trying to accelerate into her next power spikes, as Washington State are just going to hold on to Dragon Control and probably take it with ease, unless Proxy is able to find a beautiful steal through all the CC that is bound to come out.
Yep, they might find themselves an angle with the Samira being dead, but here's a flank from the Cassiopeia coming down from the top lane. The Morgana's going to get blown up instantly by Barlos Sedan on that Syndra, and now the shutdown onto Kane. Looks like he couldn't take up 4 people that time, as now it's a 5v3 situation for Oregon. PD Triplet forced to use that flash to get away from Tycoon, who was zoning away 3 members all by himself, as the rest of the team is going to pick up yet another Mountain Dragon and bolster the tankiness and get themselves one step closer to that Mountain Soul that is going to make the game very difficult for Oregon.
Yep, Washington State is a tanky team that's just getting tankier. They are 1 dragon away from getting Mountain Soul, where they get a shield that is based off of, I think, that scales really well with health, AD, and AP damage. So the health is something that Washington State has in spades, as a Turu.
Yeah, but the health is going to go pretty
out.
low for Ituru on this Shen. He's trying to walk it out, but the bandage toss is going to reign true, as well as the headbutt from out of nowhere. Another kill picked up by Washington State. They might have found themselves a barren angle, but they are just going to be content with yet another pick and continue to walk away with a big advantage going their way.
Yep, and I want to bring attention to Washington State's tank line once again, because they're building very similar. They both started with the Sunfire mythic item. However, they followed that up with building into Abyssal Mask. Abyssal Mask is a little different. It is still a magic resist centric item. However, its passive is changed, where now instead of the bonus damage from magic damage when you're within range of someone, now it's just bonus damage on a target when you immobilize them. So both of these champions have crowd control in spades, and if they're able to communicate with the rest of their team, they are able to burn down target champions so much quicker.
Yep, Abyssal Mask, a cool hat, but here's another cool hat coming down on Voperto, who is looking massive on this Amumu. That is the Demonic Embrace as his 3rd item already, as Proxy on that Kane, still working towards his 3rd of his own. That Demonic Embrace going to provide a ramping % magic damage passive that once it gets fully stacked is going to provide armor and magic resist per opponent it is affecting. That's going to provide him a lot of damage, as well as taking it. That is perfectly in theme with this champion, and now maybe he's going to find the pick onto Morgana, who does not even get a chance to Black Shield, and now the Curse of the Sad Mummy going to find 2 who are trying to get out. PDX Triplet using that wind ball to try to get away from things, and now the ultimate not going to find a lot of damage against this tanky frontline, whose health bars look like they are not moving in the slightest. That is 4 members of Oregon going down without so much as a scratch on Washington State.
Yeah, I mean, you just saw it there first. the tankiness of Washington State was just too much. Sure, University of Oregon got picked. They've been getting picked for the past, 5-10 minutes constantly. It's what's moving them from finding an opportunity out of Proxy's insane team fighting ability on the previous Dragon, but now they're just getting picked at every angle and just finding themselves insurmountably behind at this point. However, the tankiness of Washington State really showed through when you just saw the infamous ability Inferno Trigger from Samira that has been known to shred through teams the second it is proc. It just does too much damage, but she just Inferno Triggered in the face of Washington State and she tickled them. You could barely tell it was happening.
Yep, and that is going to mean the Baron going the way of Washington State. The advantage just continues to grow larger as they are now 7,000 gold ahead of their opponents. Look at that in the bot lane. 4,000 gold ahead Final Hour is on this Jhin compared to the Samira. He is absolutely massive, and he is not going to be very easy to kill with how much peel he has available on his team. It's the return of tanky compositions like these between the Poppy and the Alistar to keep him alive, and we saw how much Voperto was able to create for his team with that Curse of the Sad Mumby. He turned 1 pick into 3, into 4, just with intelligent positioning. He was waiting outside the fog of war to wait for Morgana to walk up and ward that, and he was rewarded for it, as the rest of the team was not able to get away from how much crowd control there is on this Washington State composition and how much pick potential there is.
Yeah, exactly. And also, Washington State just ultimately has an easier composition to pull off. Tanky champions aren't exactly the hardest to play, and they're just able to put on the CC like onto the Morgana right here.
Yeah, just throw a bandage toss out at Blanchquin, who's going to be forced to use the stopwatch, but a beautiful petrifying gaze is going to find 3, maybe buying time for Proxy to get in here, but see, this is the Curse of the Sad Mummy finding 3 there, and Jhin with the curtain call is going to rip apart Oregon as Proxy, once he finds his way out of the belly of the Amumu, that is going to spell a pentakill for Jhin, who picked up every single kill that his team set up for him.
What are you supposed to do there if you're University of Oregon? This is why I was mentioning earlier, University of Oregon felt so pressured to find opportunities early, because that's the only time that they had opportunities, because as you get into these later stages of the game, Washington State is just too tanky to handle. When you start feeding the Syndra, the Jhin, and they start outputting insane amounts of damage, you all of a sudden can't deal damage to University of Oregon or Washington State, and you can't take damage as University of Oregon.
Yeah, Washington State, a pentakill for Final Hour on this Jhin. He's had an advantage this whole game, and he is absolutely looking on fire right now with the curtain call, hitting every single shot, and instead of opting to try to end the game there on a 50-50, they are just going to pick up the Mountain Soul. This element of inevitability is going to make it very, very difficult for University of Oregon to get back into this game, but they have a few options for it. You can see Comet, he's hit 3 items, he's got the Seraph's Embrace completed, and he has this double magic penetration, percent health shredding combination between the Leandri's Torment and the Demonic Embrace to try to make something happen against the shields and the health of Washington State's team composition. We've also got the Black Cleaver on the side of UO Proxy. That one has been changed so that now when it's fully stacked, instead of staying stagnant, it is now going to provide true damage on your abilities, but I don't know if that's going to be enough, because their AD carry is looking very stunted at this stage in the game, and with that being one of their main damage threats aside from the Cassiopeia, it looks very difficult for them to try to carve themselves a spot.
At this point, Samir's too behind. You've got to have all eyes on the Cassiopeia, where you've got to put all the eggs in Comet's basket. The Morgana's got to be right next to her and hope that she positions in a way that she just does not get annihilated by the wave of CC coming out from Washington State. If she can stay behind her line and dodge some key skill shots from Syndra, the bandage toss, if she can dodge getting rooted by the Jhin, maybe she can output enough damage to eventually cut through Washington State, but that's going to be a long time.
Yep, and in the meantime, Washington State, they are so much more powerful than their opponents, and they're just going to sit outside the turrets, waiting to slowly whittle down their opponents. You can see Tygoon just skirting outside the mid lane with that potion running. He's got 3 items of his own, and he is a one-man army that is going to force the attention of Oregon if unanswered, and now the root going to go wide onto Proxy, but it's not going to mean a single thing as there's that 4th shot damage dealing 600 to his opponent. The Stand United going to come down onto Blinkman as Valperto is looking for the angle for the Curse of the Sad Mummy. He has the percent health damage going down onto his opponents, but that's going to be a reset for PDX Triplet. The rest of the team not able to find themselves into the base to help out Alistar, and now it's a 5v4 situation. Maybe this is the opportunity that Oregon were looking for. Valperto, though, he's outside the base. He's going to get caught out by the Binding and Comet. He finds his opportunity. He lands the Miasma. He's going to keep them at bay, but oh my goodness, the Morgana is going to get blown up immediately by the Jhin. Finally, the kill is going to be answered out onto Valperto. It took 3 members of their own, but 1 4th shot from Jhin was all he needed to turn that into a 1 for 2 from Washington State.
I guess all University of Oregon needed was a little bit of a misstep from Washington State, a little bit of mispositioning, going a little too hard, trying to force these opportunities, a little uncharacteristic from the previous 37 minutes of Washington State, where they kind of just took opportunities as they were presented. They understood that their composition doesn't really have to do anything. You kind of just wait. And sure, they lost 2 kills, but they can still kind of just wait as the Baron has come up and their players are resetting, and now they're moving to the top side to establish vision to control this Baron. Because if University of Oregon step up too far here, it kind of doesn't matter if Washington State doesn't have vision, as long as they enter the top side jungle together. Any sort of ambush will kind of be all for naught, because they're just kind of hitting tanks with a dead fish at this point with the kind of damage that University of Oregon are putting out. So I guess we'll see, but my bets are on Washington State take this Baron pretty convincingly after this Amumu resets, and he kind of just walks up and takes it.
Yep, he's fully reset now, and that's Randuin's Omen. Just 1 more kick in the face of PDX Triplet on the Samira is going to make sure that she is dealing absolutely 0 damage between the crit reduction on the Randuin's Omen and the passive auto attack reduction from Amumu. And now Headbutt Pulverize going to come down onto Proxy, and the knockback, going to go down onto Blanchman, and Valperto finds himself in the midst of his team. Maybe this is a Curse of the Sad Mummy, and now Comet is going to get caught out and blown up immediately. Another beautiful Headbutt Pulverize is going to spell a carry death on the side of Oregon. That is the 2 strongest members of this Oregon team going down for Washington State, and they don't want the Baron anymore. They want Triplet's life as Final Hour is going in, and the Spirit's Refuge is going to save Triplet for just a moment as the Deadly Flourish is going to pick up the kill there, and you can see the devastating damage of this 6-item Jhin. Final Hour is absolutely shredding Oregon with all 6 of his items, and that is going to be a double kill for him, and potentially the base going down here for Washington State. The curtain call still up is going to come down onto Blanchman. He's got to put on the happy feet. One's going to connect onto him, and oh my goodness, the 4th shot of the curtain call. 2 shots was all he needed without any extra damage dealt, and that is going to be a huge victory for Washington State with a standout performance from Final Hour on Jhin.
Yeah, I mean, past the 25-30 minute mark, Washington State just kind of had to walk at University of Oregon. There wasn't a lot. There weren't many options presented to University of Oregon that they could really poke through the armor of Washington State. One of the biggest issues from University of Oregon for me was how many times they just got picked out in the jungle, because they found an opportunity back into the game when Proxy completely dominated the 2nd Mountain Dragon fight. And he got 3 kills. He was ready to take on the rest of the game, but then everyone just kind of started getting picked, and then the lead that was kind of getting built up in the early game by Washington State just turned into this tsunami that took over University of Oregon. And another thing that I'd like University of Oregon to do is maybe opt into some of these tankier champions, because we're clearly seeing how winning they are in this preseason. They were just too huge.
Yep, and it didn't help that they didn't have as much of a consistent damage option in that Samira. Of course, there was the Cassiopeia, but so much crowd control stacked up on the side of Washington State University meant that that zero mobility Cassiopeia had such a hard time getting into the thick of things and applying that consistent damage that they needed to shred through their tanks. And of course, like you said, there were a few mishaps on the side of University of Oregon, getting caught out a bit too much, but there was also a few missed opportunities on their part. I remember, of course, there was the bot lane play where they tried to force the 4-man onto their opponents with the stand united, but no dice, as they didn't have the crowd control they needed to get in there and engage that fight. And I think that might have come down to a draft issue. We often see the Samira paired up with these aggressive, all-in options in the supports. I'm thinking, of course, about Leona and Pantheon, these picks that have an on-demand option to get in there and start a fight, but instead, they responded to the Jhin Alistar combo with the Morgana, a bit more of a passive laner than the Leona and the Pantheon, and it meant that they didn't really have what they needed to force the dives that I knew they could with the Samira and how big she was with that level 6 power spike. They couldn't find what they needed to get that early game, and Kayn couldn't find the fights to get those stacks going, and that meant that a cruising early game for Washington State University meant an inevitable late game victory for them.
Yeah, exactly. Why I want University of Oregon to maybe opt into these tankier options is so they're not put in this position where they have to make things happen early. They found so many of their missteps when they were trying to force things too hard. They didn't need Shen, or they shouldn't have needed Shen to try and force all these opportunities in the bot lane so early, because that just didn't feel like University of Oregon's bread and butter. They just maybe the communication fell through, or the confusion that came out, or that has been brought upon with this new season, and the kind of chaos that maybe this has had on the mentals of these players, or just on the entire Rift in general, trying to pull out these intricate plays maybe just isn't in the cards for tonight.
Yep, fortune favors the bold, and I've got to hand it to Washington State University for how well they were able to adjust to this new patch with all these new items, these new ways to play the game, and of course, in the draft itself. We saw University of Oregon snapping up that Samira pick immediately, but the draft was beautifully played out on the side of Washington State University. At every turn, they had an answer to this Samira pick. It started out with this option to not only give a safe long-range laning pick in that Jhin, but also the lockdown that they needed to make sure that Samira wasn't able to do whatever she pleased in these team fights. And when that was answered by the Morgana, they had the Poppy as well to prevent those dashes, not only on the Samira, but from the Shen and from the Kayn that came out as well. And I think it was a really great draft that led to some really great team fights and a really great victory for Washington State University.
Yeah, I think going into this next draft, one thing I don't want to see is a Samir pickup again. Because if she is picked up, she's just going to be responded with a ton of lockdown, because we know that Washington State is ready to play it. Because the thing is, I don't think it was the bot laner's fault of University of Oregon that they fell so far behind, because there was just so much CC. What are you supposed to do? It was just a draft issue at that point. And I want this 80 carry pick to come out later, and something, if it's up, that I want them to opt in for is maybe the Ashe, who has been a big winner of this preseason, where she has really been abusing Kraken Slayer, which is a new item that at 3 hits you deal an instance of true damage that has a flat part and a percentage of your attack damage. Then she has her Runeance as usual, and then there are different options, maybe with the Ginsus, that converts your crit chance into on-hit damage, or a build that has been arising recently is using Tiamat, because now Tiamat can be used on ranged characters, and it can be used on auto attacks and abilities. So when she starts throwing her volley out with her Q, when she has it stacked up and starts attacking so fast, and it procs on your Runeant, you start getting these cleaves that start doing so much AoE damage. And that's something that might have chewed through the giant tank wall of Washington State.
Yep, you've got to be doing your homework during the preseason if you're going to play these games competitively. And like you said, that Ash option might have really helped out there. But what you did point out in your discussion of that champion was how much room there is for adjustment in these new builds with the preseason. That Kraken Slayer with the true damage and that percent component might have been what they needed to tear through the team of Washington State University. And we talked about how well the shield bow synergized with Samira, but maybe that was the game to opt for that percent health true damage option to try to deal the damage to the tanks that it looked like she was lacking out on. And I know, of course, that Inferno trigger, each of those hits is applying that on-hit effect and very quickly as well. So that was one thing to consider. But of course, everyone here at the Pac-U is still feeling out these items, and nothing's for certain still. And of course, plenty of room for adjustment in the second game. And I hope that adjustment comes not only in the form of the draft, but also in the items.
Yeah, I agree. And like I mentioned when talking about the draft initially, is I want to see the prioritization for certain champions start changing. I don't want to start revealing champions that can be abused like the Samir. I want to see safe options, maybe like the Shen again, except maybe with a tankier core this time, or just maybe different tankier options or some things that can be flexed. Maybe mid and top lane. Just some pretty serious variations going into draft because I feel like this is where the game was lost for University of Oregon.
Yep, great answer from Washington State University to that opposing draft. And now it looks like we're going to be headed into the second game draft in just a moment here. Um, Hopefully, that Amumu is going to get banned out by University of Oregon. It looked like they had very little answer to that pick and able to use the damage from that Sunfire Aegis as well as the tankiness to such great effect. And the thing is, not only are these tanks running rampant in the jungle, there are so many different options as well. I'm thinking about things like the Graves and like the Lilia, who have that early game farming power as well as that late game scaling to try to carry their team throughout all stages of the game. But it looks like a standard ban in the form of the Lucian. And there it is, Oregon immediately taking away that Amumu pick. It looked so difficult to deal with, and there's just not a lot of time for an adjustment. It's got to be banned away.
And it looks like we're still committing to the Thresh ban from University of Oregon. That was one of the picks that I thought in my head, hey, maybe we didn't need to prioritize banning out this champion, but maybe it is the support of Washington State University. Maybe he just has too much time and mastery over this champion that University of Oregon feel comfortable playing against. It looks like we're, again, banning out the Kazakhs from Washington State because not only the item changes on the Rift, but also the different jungle changes. And it looks like, again, the Elise ban is coming out. We don't want an insanely aggressive jungler out of Washington State. Oregon is willing to maybe step on the brakes and slow down the game a little bit.
Yep, jungler of Washington State University, a big fan of those early game junglers like the Elise, and like you said, their support Boodles, he's a huge Thresh player, and he's a big man of it. And now Washington State University, they know what worked last game, let's try it again, and they're going to pick up the Jhin immediately for Final Hour, who finished out last game 14, 1, and 10. A huge performance from him, and let's see if he's able to replicate it, or if Oregon has some new ideas as to how they want to deal with this Jhin.
Yep, I want the response to this Jhin pick that Washington State put onto the Samira pick, where I want to see a lockdown, but it looks like we're opting into the Kane once again. However, Proxy was one of the better performers out of the last game, so maybe this isn't too bad. It's not exactly a tank, but it's someone that Proxy feels confident piloting.
Yep. We saw how well he knew the limits of that champion, and he was able to use it in great effect in at least one team fight where he turned things around for his team with 4 kills around that second Mountain Dragon. And now Vayne is going to be locked in for University of Oregon. What do you think about Vayne as she responds to the preseason?
I think she's got the issues that Samira does, where she is very easy to be locked down. However, Vayne can completely melt tank lines with her true damage coming out from her silver bolt, but also true damage coming out of the new mythic item, Kraken Slayer. So she's gonna be able to combine the power of Kraken Slayer and Ginsu's Rage Blade to add in attack speed, on hit damage, and increase the times her Silver Bolt is going to be proc. But it looks like we get a Blitzcrank from Washington State University, where it looks like he's like, okay, you want a scaling pick? How about I make laning the worst possible experience for you?
Yeah, Boodles, he's a big Thresh player, but if you can't get Thresh, here's the next best thing, and Blitzcrank has got that fast hook, and now Nautilus is going to be locked in. Excuse me, it is going to be the Zac locked in for Washington State University, as instead of the Blitzcrank, a bit of a visual error on our part, but now the Nautilus support is going to be locked in instead, and if you can't get Thresh and it's not going to be Blitzcrank, here's another hooking champion in the form of the Nautilus to try to make the plays happen for Washington State University.
Yep. I mean, they effectively do the same thing when we're talking about working against Vayne. You're just trying to lock her down so incredibly hard, making sure that she can't do a thing. It doesn't matter if she goes invisible during her final hour, because if you press your R on Nautilus, it's just a point and click ability that will follow you no matter what. And with Washington State, we see Volperto opting for another tank option. He's like, okay, I can't get the Amumu. I'll just go for the other tank that has been dominating the preseason in the jungle.
Sunfire Aegis cannot be underestimated, and Volperto knows that well. He's done his homework, and he's going to pick up yet another tank in the form of the Zac, which is yet to show up, but maybe it's going to have a bit more of a consistent answer this time, as University of Oregon have the Vayne Lulu combination, two very well paired bot laners, as that Lulu is able to provide the attack speed that Vayne needs to provide that on-hit damage, and to continue to proc that Kraken Slayer as well as her Silver Bolts, and that might be what she needs to chew through the Zac and the Nautilus on the side of Washington State University. She's got the Tumble as well to try to dodge out on that Elastic Slingshot from Zac, that huge engage option. It's going to come down to whether she's able to dodge out on the depth charge from Nautilus. They banned out the Poppy to make sure that the Kayn and Vayne can play as well as they need to, and now Orianna is going to be locked in for University of Oregon.
I think it's a pretty good ability that she can throw onto the Kayn. Or Orianna's a good pick because she can throw her ball onto the Kayn and then find a really great shockwave onto the Jhin, because it looks like we are setting up Jhin as another primary carry for the side of Washington State. He did so much work in the last game, but now we've got a Kayle locked in. More than likely, it's going to be played on the top side because Tygoon is an avid player of Kayle, and Kayle has been dominating the preseason, working on an itemization core of Riftmaker, which does scaling damage in fights and gives the user Omnivamp, and Nashor's Tooth, where Kayle's just going to be using her attack speed to completely shred through a fight if she can get through the laning phase. And then we've also got a Galio, which is another option for an extremely defensive core for Washington State University. And it looks like Oregon are going to respond with the Malphite. They don't have tanks across the board, but at least they've got one in the top lane, one with an insane, unrelenting force on his R that he's going to throw at this Jhin time and time again. It doesn't matter where he's positioned, because he's just going to get hit by the mountain being thrown at his face. And maybe this will be an opportunity to find these wombo combos with the unrelenting force, shockwave onto the Jhin, onto the Kayle, and get these carries out of the way. Because as soon as these carries are gone, if the Vayne is alive, which she hopefully will be, with the supporting ability of this Lulu, she's going to shred through teams with Kraken Slayers, Silver Bolts, Whimsy, just dominating everyone in front of her. So I definitely like this draft more from the side of Oregon than the game previous. How do you feel?
Yep, we talked about draft adjustments on the side of University of Oregon, and it looks like they have arrived. Vayne is here to provide the true damage and percent health that they need to counter the, once again, triple tank composition on the side of Washington State University with these two backline damage dealers in the form of the Jhin and the Kayle. And in response to that Jhin, who looked like he had all the space in the world to do the damage that he needed, there is the Malphite coming out. Like you said, there is not anything you can do when unstoppable force is arriving your way. And in conjunction with the shockwave, it's going to mean that the Jhin and the Kayle, who lack mobility on their own, are going to have to play these fights a lot more intelligently than they did last game, unless the Zac and the Galio are able to run away with this game like the Poppy and Amumu of last game.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be really on the two that you mentioned for Washington State University to find these opportunities to break apart this University of Oregon team. Now, they might have the tools to shred through Washington State's team and find these big plays, but it still does not solve a major issue of the last game that we saw, which was mispositioning. If they get caught out in the jungle, by their by Washington State just running around and finding them everywhere, because we know they like to run around in their little death ball. They're just going to get caught out again and just see the game crumble before them. So if University of Oregon can shore up that issue, I think they have a really good fighting chance this time, because now that they have a Vayne, they're not pressured to do things early. Oriana skills, Vayne skills, Lulu, Malphite, Kane. They all don't have to do things early. All Kane has to do is just find some skirmishes here and there. He doesn't have to all in on fights. He just needs to find enough skirmishes, enough interactions to get his evolve.
Yep, and I think what's going to work to the advantage of each of these teams is that there isn't as much poke, or not poke, excuse me, as much catch potential that we had in these previous games. Before, there was the Morgana binding to be afraid of. There was the Alistar Jhin combination that we had to be afraid of. And now we do have the Jhin paired with the Nautilus, which is going to provide that opportunity, but not as much of a long range as that Headbutt Pulverize into the Deadly Flourish that we had last game. And that might give University of Oregon a bit more space to work with, but there is another long range catch option in the form of the Elastic Slingshot. And if that can find its mark onto its opponents, especially onto more than one, I can see the Galio coming in with that massive knockup ultimate from global range to try to follow up and create a huge teamfight opportunity for Washington State University.
Yep, we've already seen how great of an engaged player that Foberto can be, and hopefully we'll see that again coming into this game. And for Barlos, we're actually going to see a really different play style coming into this game, because where before he was setting himself up as a primary carry for the side of University of Oregon, now he's on a more supportive pick for the Galio. Tygoon tagged in as the secondary carry player, and Barlos is going to look to try and support these lanes. I can expect a lot of his ults coming out into the top lane to try and protect this Kale as Kale tries to scale up. Malphite, even though he's a tank, he has a lot of tools to really harass his lane opponent. He can keep these seismic shards into Kale's face, and Kale might have a heal in her kit, but it's really small, really underwhelming, and it's not going to help her sustain through lane. She's going to have a lot of support from the rest of his team, or else we're going to see Malphite getting in Kale's face and Kane just flanking from every angle possible to set Kale behind insurmountably.
Yeah, we saw a bit of a quieter early game in game one, and we might follow suit because there's a lot of late game inevitability on both of these compositions. Kale, one of the premier late game scaling threats in League of Legends, with as soon as she hits level 16, she's dealing area of effect damage to everyone. So much consistent damage on her part, and of course the Vayne to match her on the other side. One of the oldest late game scaling champions in the book, now with even more options in the item department to make sure that she reaches that level where she is able to basically 1v5 if she is given the opportunity. And of course, Oriana and Jhin, very strong scalers in their own right, and it's going to come down to not only which of these teams is able to feel out the early game to their advantage, but also to these team fights which are going to be inevitably forced. I'm thinking about around the Dragons and around the Rift Heralds potentially, and whoever comes out on top of these is going to start to build that advantage that might snowball like it did in the first game.
Yep, and as we get into the late game, all eyes start to turn toward the supports, because sure, both sides of the teams have tools to really dominate team fights, but what's going to play a really key role is what support and what teams are going to help their supports establish these vision lines and get this vision control, because Malphite becomes a lot scarier when he uses his unstoppable force from Fog of War. If you don't see it coming, you can't react.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about the Zac pick in the jungle on the side of Washington State University is that when you see the Zac, you often see these kind of counter champions to him. You see something like a Janna or like a Gragas, something that has this on-demand ability to stop that elastic slingshot from finding that huge long-range engage. But on the side of University of Oregon, there isn't very much in that department. We've got Wild Growth, which can be well-timed to try to use that knock-up to stop him. But apart from that, Malphite Malphite, he doesn't have a lot of on-demand crowd control unless he wants to use that unstoppable force onto one man to try to prevent that engage. And I don't know if Voperto is much of a Zac player, but if he's able to find those angles, it is going to be huge for Washington State University.
Yep. I mean, I guess there's Blade's Reach for the Kane on the side of University of Oregon to try and block the Zac. But like you mentioned, the elastic slingshots are just going to, if Aperto is able to aim them correctly, they're going to hit home pretty much every single time. And that can cause so much chaos for the side of University of Oregon. Vayne can do a lot of damage if she's alive.
Yep, and like we did mention earlier in Game 1, we would have liked to see University of Oregon opt for more of these tank options. And while they do have the Malphite, absolutely one of the tankiest champions in League of Legends, apart from that, they're running fairly similar composition to what they had in Game 1, right? Aside from the Vayne, which is now a much more reliable, consistent threat to these tanks, they have that Enchantress support, and they have something of a control mage to try to keep the opponents at bay, and as well as the Kayn in the jungle, who didn't have much of an impact on the early game in Game 1, but maybe now he's going to find his opportunity against the Zac.
Yep. Or maybe now he doesn't have to, because, you have the Vayne that's going to scale incredibly, because now Washington State's composition doesn't look like this crazy ticking time bomb, because as their wall gets bigger, Vayne's power just grows. She grows into this giant cannon that's going to completely blow them wide open if she's able to find her opportunities. And now that's a big if. However, she does have the amazing support of Lulu on her side. So even if she does get engaged on, if Washington State finds some CC onto her, Lulu's able to make sure she's okay. I'm sure she's going to find the Mikhail's, I think it's Blessing now instead of Crucible. But to cleanse the CC onto the Vayne to make sure she has the opportunities to run over the map.
I mean, she's got the polymorph as well if anyone finds themselves onto that Vayne, but we're going to be headed into the game in just a moment, and I want to look to see if we're going to see a bit more of an intense early game. Zac, a lot of ganking power and a lot more creative angles to find these gank opportunities than the Amumu, who more or less has to walk into a bush and try to find the bandage toss, elastic slingshot. Devastating ability if you can land it, and it's got a lot of range and a lot of ways that he can. And now 5 members of Washington State University starting to barrel down into the mid lane. Going to run straight down this lane and going to be met by the Orianna in their face. A bit more of a defensive stance on the side of Oregon.
Yep, we're just seeing a 5-point setup from the side of University of Oregon, as no one really wants to create opportunities on the level 1. Actually, it looks like Vaperto might be looking to set down a ward onto Kane's Raptors. Kane looks like he might be starting onto his blue side, but Raptors is a very easy camp for Kane to pick up. So Vaperto knows that Kane is going to be pathing toward the Raptors very early on into his clear, and will get some information onto where he's going. Hopefully it will prevent Tygoon from maybe getting ganked too early on and setting him back too far behind the Malphite. And it looks like on the Malphite, we've got the Arcane Comet set up against Tygoon, because he knows he's not going to ever be able to proc his Grasp of the Undying past level 6 once Tygoon's Kale turns into a ranged champion. So he's going for the Arcane Comet to get this harass going, and it looks like minions are starting to meet and the laning phase is beginning.
Tygoon, he was very content playing the weak side in Game 1 when he was on that Poppy. No matter how many times he was ganked, he was going to continue to be useful because of how much tankiness innately is built into his champion. But this time, he's playing much more of a carry role on the side of the Kayn, and there's Budo's looking for a bit of a hook in the level 1, and going to try to force away Triplet from this wave to make sure that it's Washington State finding themselves with the early level 2, but like I was saying, Tygoon, he's got the carry role. He's got the carry role this game, and it's going to depend on whether his team is going to want to play around him or let himself fend safely for himself in the face of Malphite Kayn, who have a lot of dive potential. But of course, Tygoon has the response with that invulnerability in his ultimate.
It looks like in the first couple minutes of the game, Proxy is abusing the fact that he's a much faster clearer than his opponent on the Zac. Kayn is already on his 5th camp as Zac is struggling to leave his wolves at 240. Kane is going to move very quickly as the ward has already died for Washington State and might be pathing toward the top side to get some early damage onto Tygoon, but instead he's going for the full clear onto his Scruggs and getting up to 24 CS as quickly as possible.
Yep, can't honestly blame him for opting for the full clear. Kane is so good at it, and if you can get it unpunished and follow up with a Scuttle Crab, that is so much advantage being created for you without the uncertainty of having to have a successful gank. And full clearing, one of the best practices for junglers like Kane, who have so much reliable clear options, as well as champions like Hecarim and Lilia, who are able to do those AoE camps very well for themselves. But now in the bot lane, the wave is going to head back to the Washington State bot lane, and you can see both junglers are starting to trade out the Scuttle Crabs. Zach a camp behind as he wasn't able to do the Krugs as quickly, lest he lose a bit of tempo as he opts for that Scuttle Crab, but for the most part, things are starting to pan out a bit quieter.
Yep, not too much action happening, not too many advantages being created on either side, and it looks like Orianna is looking for a bit of a trade onto Galio, but she's burned through so much of her mana, she's going to have to back soon enough. And in the top lane, it looks like Tygoon is finding himself a bit of a CS advantage. Proxy looking for a cheeky bit of damage into the mid lane, but ultimately adding up to nothing with the Aftershock proccing for the Galio.
At the very least, he's going to get himself some stacks towards that red Kane build, but like you said, nothing going to happen so far. And Boodle's on that Nautilus. These hooks that we've seen how well they've been able to do before, and now Volperto is going to be spotted on a ward, but it might be a bit too late as the Elastic Slingshot is going to come down and timed beautifully with the dredge line from Boodles to connect him into the Elastic Slingshot, and that is going to spell first blood for the jungler of Washington State. A very well played gank, even in the face of a ward.
Yeah, not only was it a great gank by Volperto, it gives him the first blood, but Oregon gave away their first blood while also still eating both flashes from the bot lane and the cleanse out of Vayne. She tried to cleanse the CC from Nautilus, but the Elastic Slingshot was just going over his shoulder and hitting him anyways.
Yep, a brilliant setup by the bot lane of Washington State is going to spell first blood and start to claw back some of the tempo that was lost just by how much faster Kane can clear than his opponent. And while he might be 10 CS up at the moment, the kill did go the way of Volperto, and if he picks up something like a Balmy Cinder, it's going to increase his clear speed by a lot. Now in the top lane, Tygoon, he's backed. He started with the Door and Shield, an interesting option against Malphite just to block some of the damage from those seismic shards, but now he's got that recurve bow and try to build towards something of a legendary item. We'll see if he's going to turn into a mythic, but for the moment it doesn't look like it.
More than likely, the Kayle is going to start off with a Nash's Tooth to try and cut through Malphite's massive health pool, but now Nash's Tooth not only gives AP more AP and more attack speed than before, but we're seeing an increased on-hit effect from Nashers. So we've lost the cooldown reduction that Nash's Tooth used to have into giving it more of an identity as a strictly on-hit item. So this will help Kayle cut through Malphite and potentially scale up harder to opt for more damage instead of more security if Kayle were to opt for Riftmaker first.
Yep, the Riftmaker, there is that true damage and ramping damage option, but it looks like she values the increased attack speed to help her out in lane in the form of the Nashor's Tooth. And now we saw Volperto, he got that kill in the bot lane, but instead of backing, he actually opted to continue to full clear towards the top side. Meanwhile, Proxy, he had the opportunity to get a back off for himself, and he's going to pick up the Iron Spike Whip during that back. That's going to be the active component of what was formerly known as the Tiamat. And now with that item advantage, because Volperto hasn't found the opportunity to back yet, it's going to mean that he's going to try to steal away this blue buff, but not before Volperto slams him into it, and Barlow's, with the ultimate from the Galio, is going to pick up a kill for himself. Proxy, he thought he had the item advantage, and he thought he had the 2v2 power with Itaru on this Malphite, but it's going to be a bit of an overstep as he's going to go down to the mid laner of Washington State.
Yeah, that was a bit greedy from Proxy, trying to make something happen there, and I don't know. It's unfortunate, but definitely not the end of the world for Kane, as he's able to continue to clear faster and hopefully use his map awareness to find opportunities to invade when Zach isn't there. And yeah, I don't know. I think Proxy's still fine as Boodles is looking for an engage.
Oh, but it's
onto
triplet
Vayne.
fine as the Dredge Line and the Root are going to connect onto him. Double teleports going down. It's going to be the Galio and the Orianna joining the fight. The taunt is going to come down onto the Orianna. Comet is going very low, but he finds a 3-man shockwave before he goes down, and the Dredge Line is once again going to connect onto Triplet, who picks up a trade kill onto Boodles, but there's the elastic slingshot once again. Proxy's now joining the battle. He's level 6, but he doesn't have the ultimate, having to use it to stay alive in that blue buff fight, and now the fight has completely turned in the favor of Washington State. A 4v4 is going to mean 3 kills for 1, it looks like.
Yep,
for Washington State.
And it looks like during the skirmish in the bot lane, there was actually a 1v1 in the top lane.
Solo kill, actually.
Where Tygoon found himself a solo kill onto the Malphite and is accelerating ahead over this pick that we thought might abuse Tygoon, but it looks like it's the other way around.
Yeah, it's starting to look like a replay of Game 1. We pointed out a lot of the flaws from University of Oregon had to do with how they were forcing these early game fights. We saw in the blue buff, they were trying to force themselves an advantage when they thought they had one, but they were not respecting the ability of Barlos with that Galio ultimate to come in and aid his teammates, turning it into a 3v2 very quickly. They got punished for that, and then they got punished down in the bot lane when they tried to turn around this gank and not respecting where the Washington State University members could be. And they're going to get very punished for it, as now that's going to be 6 kills to 1 at just 9 minutes into this game. Much more of a high-tempo early game than we had in Game 1.
Yeah, University of Oregon, I don't know. I don't know why they keep trying to force these things, because they have a Vayne, an Orianna, a Malphite. You can scale into monsters. There's no reason to be trying to push these advantages when you don't need to. I mean, Proxy had such a slow and content early game in the first game, and now that he has a team that scales even better, he's trying to fish for these opportunities.
Yep, and looks like they might have to slow things down for now, but we're going to see if Washington State is going to let them, as they don't mind having to accelerate the pace at this stage in the game, as they are looking really far ahead. Look at the gold disparities now. 600 gold ahead. The Zac 2-0-2 against his opponent, the Kane. Gold advantages as well in the ball. And final hour once again accruing just a passive advantage even before those kills came out. Now 1,000 gold ahead of the opposing AD carry. Not to mention the solo kill from Tygoon on Kale, who we traditionally think of as a late game scaling pick. It's going to mean that Kale is now also 1,000 gold ahead of their opponent, and that's going to make things very difficult as dragons start to spawn and objectives need to be fought over in this early stage of the game.
Yeah, so now University of Oregon are in a really bad spot where they've just kind of got to mitigate losses until Vayne hits 2 items or Orianna hits at least her mythic, because as soon as she hits Luden's Tempest, she can really do some serious damage onto these squishier members. But even then, I think she'll still need her secondary item, whichever one she might itemize into, because mage itemization isn't exactly so exact right now, with, you know, the meta not exactly being solved yet. But we can expect something, maybe an Archangels, maybe a Horizon Focus.
Yeah, and maybe in the mid lane, as now the Galio ultimate is going to come down onto Voperto. He has the slam from his Q, and now he's got the knockup. Let's bounce as Proxy goes down very low. Comet as well. Is the current call going to connect? It is not yet, but Lulu is also going to be how Blanche Quinn is forced to flash away, and the fight is still going down in the mid lane as Voperto flashing onto the Kane is going to pick up one last kill with that unstable matter. He is now 3-0-2 in this jungle matchup and turning that skirmish into the favor of Washington State once again.
This game is spiraling out of control very quickly. We're looking at ourselves almost 5k gold behind for University of Oregon, and you've got to wonder, like, why are they in such risky positions so early on into the game? Zac is just gonna take down mid tower for the first turret, put so much gold into the pockets of Barlos and Voperto, and they're just gonna continue doing what they've started this game doing, just running into everyone, finding all these opportunities, because now they are in the position to force things as Vayne is looking for the engage onto Jhin.
Yep, both ultimates going to come down in the final hour, and the Wild Growth are going to keep Triplet alive as he goes back in for the re-engage. Boodles, he's going to keep him locked up with that passive and with that Dredge line is going to mean that Triplet is forced to flash away from that one. They thought they might have had an angle there, but now the Summoner going to be forced out from them. And final hour with his flash not up, didn't even have to use it, but he did use the heal at least. And bit of a skirmish, but fortunately no kills, continuing to go the way of Washington State because this bad situation is continuing to get worse.
Yeah, when we look at the bot lane CS discrepancy, we're seeing a 50 CS difference with three more assists in the pocket of final hour. He's just so ahead in the gold, and now University of Oregon finds themselves what is that, 6k gold behind, more than? I mean, it's looking like a pretty doomsday scenario at this point, where we're finding the mythic items coming out for Washington State now. It looks like the University of Oregon found a cheeky blue buff. That's good. That's a step in the right direction, but is it enough? As they're looking for this pick onto Tygoon, but Tygoon was wizened up to it. He was already so close to his turret, just had to walk away.
Yep, I can imagine I too wanted to call that one off after that early solo kill. I can imagine Tygoon has the heads up to use that invulnerability as soon as the Unstoppable Force comes out and prevent that CC from happening, and not a lot of follow-up on the rest of Oregon is going to mean that they are not going to try another risky play. Instead, they're going to have to give up yet another dragon, the Ocean Dragon, and to synergize very well with the Zac, who is already very, very far ahead. He's got the Sunfire Aegis and the Ninja Tabi. A Giant's Belt as well is going to mean that he is so far ahead of his opponent, who can hardly come up with an item of his own. He's trying to scrape together a Gore Drinker like in Game 1, but a matchup where the Kayn was supposed to outfarm his opponent is now looking very, very doomed, and the Smite from Voperto is going to mean a blue buff stolen back, and Proxy was looking angry at him, but he's going to have to look away, as now the Elastic Slingshot almost going to find the Vayne, but a well-placed Condemn is going to knock him up, and a two-man Shockwave is going to try to keep the opponents at bay, but Barlow's Ladane with the Proto Belt finds 3 with the taunt, and so much damage with that Mythic Proto Belt item. Proxy is diving in to try to find 1 kill onto the Galio, but he gets it, but at the cost of his life. Ituru is here to join the fight, and he is beating down final hour in the back, but he does not have the follow-up that he needs. There's Triplet with the kill onto the opponent again, and Galio going to go down, but Ituru going to be traded out. Here's the teleport coming down onto the Zac Ball. That is the Kale joining the fight now. Does she have the slow? Does she have the damage? There's the Elastic Slingshot to mean that Voperto is unstoppable. The shutdown not going the way of Oregon, but at least 2 kills going to be traded out for 4 for Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, historically in League of Legends, the spike when you completely finish your first item was already strong, but it just got so much stronger with the inclusion of these mythic items. The damage discrepancy wasn't even close. With Zac, Galio, and Jhin all having their mythic items, they were just able to run over that fight. Sure, Vayne was eventually able to find some damage, finding the pick onto Nautilus, and Galio eventually dying, but it just wasn't enough. I mean, they tried to push the issue onto Zac at the end, but the TP came out. Jhin just did so much damage and just walked into Vayne and Orianna's face without a care in the world, because he knew he could just one-shot them.
Yep, even the mountain being thrown at him was no trouble for final hour. No skin off his nose, as he has that Gale Force equipped once again, so far ahead of his opponent, who is yet to come up with an item on that Vayne. She is a late game scaler, but you got to start getting those items soon, or this game is going to get very out of control, as Vayne is not contributing a lot to this team. And speaking of items, Tygoon, he did opt for the Nashor's Tooth first, like you suggested, and we're going to see which of the mythic items he wants after that. I'm assuming it's going to be the Rift Maker to provide that ramping true damage option, but like we've said throughout the night, there is just so much room to experiment with in these new items. And of course, speaking of gold advantage, you cannot ignore how far ahead Voperto is compared to you, Proxy. Zac is one of those champions, even as a tank, who once he starts to get the ball rolling, becomes very, very difficult to deal with, between how much health he is able to restore with his passive and how much crowd control he's able to apply in these team fights.
Yeah, the 2,500 gold lead coming out of Voperto is just so much. Kayn is just so far behind because he got so greedy in the early game. He was trying to look for all these opportunities when he could have just kind of been content with speedily clearing his jungle and using information that he was guaranteed. He should have only went for these invades when he saw Zach in the bot lane, or saw him on the opposite side of the map, not just running into him.
And while Oregon is positioned in the mid lane, they're not going to want to contest this Rift Herald. They're finally going to respect how far ahead Washington State is in items and going to try to use the opportunity to pick up some farm for themselves. Orianna in the bot lane, and main looking to back finally with a mythic item, I assume. 5,000 gold in the bank, but there's another Rift Herald going the way of Washington State University, and that is going to be the second Rift Herald for Washington State in this series. And with mid lane already cracked, we're going to see what they want to do with that one. That one, if they can get a team fight going, that might even go all the way to the inhibitor.
Yeah. Oof. I mean, I wouldn't doubt it, because Washington State can just kind of run over Oregon now. If they even find them anywhere close to them, just like Galio
running over, here's Barlos with the Proto Belt. One last punch is going to take out Comet in the bot lane. Like you were saying, they're so far ahead that they can just walk at their opponents, and it looks like Oregon not quite realizing that yet, as the all-in from Barlos is not going to be respected. Comet might have had that Luden's Tempest, a mythic item of his own, but you've got to respect how much damage this Galio has between the mythic item and the Sorcerer's Shoes, and another kill going the way of Washington State is going to continue to increase the gold advantage to 8k.
Barlos just ran over Comet like a minion, man. I don't know what Oregon can do at this point, because they're just so far behind, because it cannot be understated how well Washington State have been playing. It's not only that Oregon has been kind of pushing themselves into these unfavorable opportunities, but Washington State have been forcing them there. They found their early advantages and they ran with it. In against a lesser team, Oregon would not have been punished for these extensions, but now Boodles is maybe biting off a little more than he can chew, because they might be super far ahead, but that's a Malphite. You're not going to cut through him in 2 seconds.
Yeah, tries to find the pick with the Dredge line into the Deadly Flourish, but with the second route not connecting is going to mean that Voperto is not going to find the Elastic Slingshot, but not a problem for Washington State, as they made brilliant use of that pick onto the Orianna in the bot lane to get themselves at Soul Point, a Mountain Dragon once again for this triple tank composition. Nautilus, Zach, Galio, they are getting so much value out of these Mountain Dragons, if they can accrue them. Look at that, 2 items completed already for Barlos on this Galio, while HH Comet is scraping by with an Amplifying Tome.
One thing I'd like to point out is that on the Jhin, well, it's just something interesting, because it's another new item that we haven't been able to see. We're seeing the Serpent's Fang come out for Jhin, and it's a brand new item that was introduced into this game, where against shielded targets, the user does, I believe, 50% more damage against them. So it's basically the new anti-shield item. And that's going to be a nice pickup against the Lulu, as Nautilus is trying to find a pick onto
Comet. Speaking of nice picks, here's a Shockwave onto Boodles, who tried to find the Dredge line, but oh my goodness, Voperto is in the midst of it all with the Let's Bounce. He finds 4 people, and now Galio is going to join him. Barlos has to flash out of the, but Voperto is still so tanky, as final hour on that Jhin is going to find the kill onto Orianna and land the last curtain call shot. PDX triplet going to go down to just the taunt, and Barlos trying to find one last kill with the Winds of War, but that is not even going to be necessary, as now that is 4 kills going the way of Washington State, and they've got their pick of the litter. Do they want the Baron? Do they want the Inhibitor? They've got a Rift Herald going, and they might even go all the way, as that was a huge team fight that looks so difficult to play against for Oregon, and it's going to mean a Baron Nashor going to be started up for Washington State.
Yeah, that was gross. It looked like Boodles might have picked off more than he could chew at the start. He went in, and then a Shockwave just met him right in his face. But as it started to look maybe a little disadvantageous for Washington State, Voperto just jumped in and ulted 4 members. He just was up in their face and was like, yeah, you gave me all this gold, now I'm gonna use it, and just bounced all over you. There's just nothing more Oregon could have done, because even if they turn their attention to Voperto, how do you cut through all his health and resistances? He's just so far ahead.
And look at that. He opted for the Abyssal Mask just like he did in Game 1 playing that in Mumu, and he is looking just as strong as he did in that game, if not stronger. Usually you see Zax opt for something like a Spirit Visage to increase that healing and how they're able to sustain out these teamfights, but he is not about that life at all. He is here to deal the damage, and we saw him do it in the midst of 4 people, staying alive with the Let's Bounce. He had the passive to keep himself alive, and where Barlow's had to flash out of there, he would continue to keep it up and buy so much space for final hour to pick up these kills and get such a free curtain call. And now Baron buffed minions are staring down the base. An inhibitor looks to be cracked here as they're trying to mount the base defense. Common is going to be locked up by the passive. Here's the unstoppable force into the shockwave onto final hour, but is it enough? The seismic shot not nearly going to do anything to him, as once again we can see the combo of Tygoon and the Zac doing everything in the backline. A double kill for the kill and for the Jin is going to mean a very fast victory for Washington State. An absolute statement game to close this series out 2-0.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great unstoppable force by Malphite finding that Jin at the start of that fight. He forced him out where he wasn't able to do too much, but when you feed a couple tanks that badly, they can do some damage too. They're just going to run into your backline and make sure they pop in an instant.
Yep, and run into the fountain as well for just the last bit of BM as they're going to finish this best of 3 series 2-0. Both games looking hugely commanding. And what I think is so key to point out about this game is how well Washington State University was playing with these preseason items. We saw it in Game 1, we saw it with the Sunfire Aegis being on the top side, and we saw it again in the second game. Like you pointed out, there was that Serpent's Fang, this brilliant tech item Riot has added for this continually prominent mechanic we're seeing in shields, and we had a big shield comp coming out on University of Oregon and answered so well and so immediately with that second item, Serpent's Fang, and I love to see it. I love to see these players experimenting with these new items, and I love to see them doing their homework.
Yeah, you've got to commend Washington State for really doing their research in the first couple days of preseason, because they were already utilizing these brand new items or historic items that have been recently changed to great effect, with not only the Serpent's Fang being picked up, but with Washington State abusing the new Abyssal's Mask, abusing the new Sunfire Mythic passive, final hour really using Gale Force's new active to great effect. Washington State just played really great all around.
Yep, and it wasn't just the items, right? It was also how they were able to adjust to the draft and the priority that is being welcomed in with this new preseason. We saw it in Game 1 with the Amumu and again the Zac, two hugely powerful snowballing tank options that have that late game scaling and that brilliant ability to use the Sunfire Aegis as well as the Abyssal Mask. And they look totally on top of things throughout the draft, able to have such a good answer to the Samira, who we thought looked unstoppable in the early stages of the Pac-U, but now Washington State, they've crafted this answer to it, and it worked out beautifully in Game 1. And now in Game 2, even when Oregon looked like they had the answer to this tank composition, they were able to mechanically overcome their opponents, with lack of a better way to phrase it. We saw solo kills in the top lane, and once again, this bot lane fight being turned around completely to turn the game in Washington's favor.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked University of Oregon's game or draft going into this game, because the biggest way that they could have won this game is if their Vayne got to that 2-item power spike. The Kraken Slayer Ginsu's would have started shredding that tank frontline if they were on anywhere near even footing, but that's just it. They weren't. Washington State ran away with that early game, even though they had such great late game options. They took a late game team and just took advantage of the enemy anyways. They didn't have all the tools in the early game, but they took what they did have and just blew the game wide open. And it wasn't just about what they had, it was also about University of Oregon maybe looking for too much. They felt like they had more options than they did.
Yep, and aside from those later fights where things really got out of control, and even with those early skirmishes, it looked like in some of these fights, things could have really gone either way. One close fight in Game 2 really could have gone either way. It was in that blue buff of Oregon, where we had the Malphite TP come in to try to find the kill onto Jin. But it looked like with the early advantages that Washington State University was able to accrue just with their mechanical prowess, it was not enough. And that was what they needed to try to close out the series so well.
Yeah, I mean, you got to wonder how these teams walk away from it. I mean, of course, Washington State is going to feel great, but I really hope that University of Oregon doesn't walk away with their heads held too low. This is the preseason. This is a completely new game that they're playing in. They just got the rug ripped out from under them, and now they're playing in a completely new environment. It's just so chaotic. And sure, there was some decision making errors along the way, but I'm sure that they were inspired by all the brand new chaos that was just thrown onto the Rift. They're looking at a completely different game.
Yep, that's what I love to see it from these show matches, is these teams experimenting, working with the preseason, playing this entirely new game at such a high level, and Washington State University coming out on top when it comes to playing that new game with these tank picks. That's going to be one of the big meta spots that I think we'll see continuing in these games, and whether that is going to be all that we're left with, or if teams start working with some of the other options available to them, remains to be seen. I know there's so much more to be offered from the preseason.
Yeah, exactly. I felt really inspired by Washington State's just utilization of all these new items. They used everything to great effect. I mean, you got to wonder how much time they put into reading through these patch notes and playing their normal games to try and see what items not only looked great on paper, but felt really great in game. Because Abyssal Mask, especially, when you get that immobilizing effect on its passive, it's only a 10% increase in damage, but it looked like it did so much work for the tanks of Washington State.
Yep, and with that adjustment, they're able to walk away from this series with a 2-0, and I'm hoping to see whether the next two teams that we have lined up are coming out with some of the spice of their own, or if they're going to try to stick to what they know and try to feel things out play things by ear. Like you said, there's that Sunfire, of course, but I think there's so much more available, especially in the jungle department. There's tanks, but there's also assassins, there's AP champions. There's so much to do and so much to see, and hopefully we're going to see it in the next series that we have coming up.
Yeah, something I'd like to see especially is that in normal games right now, assassins are really dominating the mid lane meta that has been evolving in these first couple games, or in these first couple of days. But in the games we just saw here, it was just all mages, and a Galio in the corner. But these staples that we've seen a lot in competitive games historically. But I really like this exciting new high tempo play style to come out of the mid lane with picks like maybe Fizz, Echo, Akali. It would just be so exciting to watch and cast.
Yep, plenty of options in the mid lane, especially for those assassins. I'm thinking about the Night Harvester, which is providing those resets for AP champions when they hit different opponents, and of course the AD assassins as well. They've had some tools to play with. We talked about the Eclipse, but neither of the teams that we saw today brought that item out, and I'm hoping to see who's the first to make use of its great effect, and not only in the mid lane, but of course we've seen it in the AD carry role. We talked about how we wanted to see it on the Jhin, and we can even see it in the top lane and in the jungle.
Yep, and we'll have to see if we are lucky enough to see Eclipse in action in the next series after this break.
Showing off, don't wanna have to wait tonight. Better off, I'm gonna find my way tonight. Won't you talk to me? I wanna heal your sorrow. Won't you talk to me? We'll make a new tomorrow. Won't you talk to me?
When I'm up through the night, I can't turn down the noise, tear all the worries out of my mind. About who I'm supposed to be, I start to believe I can't get it right. Remember the days I let slip away, they were simpler times. Mama told me before you leave, if there's only one thing you remember from me, child, when you're out on your own,